Today's guest is a repeat offender. One of my favorites, Dr. Chris Kresser, is the co-founder of the California Center of Functional Medicine and the founder of the Kresser Institute. He's the host of a top-ranked podcast called Revolution Health Radio and the creator of chriskresser.com. He's a New York Times bestselling author of The Paleo Cure and Unconventional Medicine, and he's one of the most respected clinicians in the functional medicine and ancestral health space. He was named top 100 most influential people in health and fitness by greatest.com and has appeared on everything from Dr. Oz to Time, NPR, Fox and Friends, you name it. He lives in Park City, Utah with his wife and daughter. You will learn about their struggles to conceive their daughter, Sylvie, when we talk all about nutrient inadequacies and how supplementing and eating a nutrient-dense diet can help. Chris Kresser recently launched a supplement line called Adapt Naturals. If you listen into the show and find interest in this line of supplementation, you can use the code BeWellByKelly for a discount to our community. So I hope you enjoy the podcast and learn a lot along the way. Well, the infamous Chris Kresser, welcome back to the show. One of my favorites.
Pleasure to be with you again, Kelly, as always.
It's really, really fun to have you. And today's topic is exciting and timely for me, being that I'm moving into my third trimester soon. And today we're going to be talking about nutrient deficiencies and your wife's struggles to conceive. So can we just talk about, in general, what's happening? Like, why are there so many nutrient deficiencies? Why are people in a suboptimal place? I mean, we're not walking around with scurvy, but it's impacting us. And why?
Yeah. So to be clear, the trouble conceiving, it could have been my wife, could have been me, could have been both. That's the interesting thing about conception. A lot of it often we assume, not saying you do, but the assumption is it's the woman who's having trouble, but very often it's the male. So we'll come back to that, I'm sure. There are lots of reasons why most people are nutrient deficient. The biggest one is that 60% of the calories the average American consumes today come from highly processed and refined foods that basically don't have any nutrients in them. So, you don't need to be a math genius to figure out if 60% of what you eat has no nutrients, then you're going to end up being nutrient deficient. But I imagine most of the people who are watching and listening to this show don't fall into that category. They're likely doing a lot better than the general population, thanks to you, in terms of what they're eating on a day-to-day basis. And the sad reality is that even with a good whole foods, nutrient-dense diet, you can still end up having problems today. And there are lots of reasons for that. I'll just give you the top three, in my opinion. One is decline in soil quality. And this means that the plants are not extracting as many nutrients from the soil as they used to. And then when we eat the plants or when we eat animals that have eaten the plants, we don't get as much nutrition as we used to, even from the same food. So if we're eating the same good quality foods, plants and animals, we're not getting as much nutrition as we used to. There was one study, a statistic from one study that really stuck in my brain, which was that we'd have to eat 8 oranges today to get the same level of nutrition that our grandparents got from a single orange. That's a massive difference in just a couple generations. We're not talking about thousands of years. We're talking about, the last 50 years, really profound changes.
Right.
The second reason is increase in environmental toxins. So we've all heard about heavy metals, bisphenol A, glyphosate, herbicides and pesticides becoming ubiquitous in our food supply. That's unfortunately true. And these toxins tend to bind to nutrients, or nutrients bind to the toxins, if you put it on the flip side, in an effort to protect us from the toxic exposure. But the result is that we end up not being able to absorb and utilize those nutrients. So that's another big factor. And then number 3 would be globalization of our food supply. So I think a lot of people heard the statistic that the average carrot travels 1,800 miles before it reaches your plate. The problem with that is as soon as you take a plant out of the ground, it immediately starts losing nutrition.
Yeah.
Nutrient values start to decline. So if you imagine a scenario where basil is harvested in Guatemala. It then goes to, from wherever it's harvested to a ship in the harbor, gets on the ship, gets transported, on the ship to United States. Then it goes in a train or a truck to the grocery store. It sits in the back of the store for a while. Eventually you buy it, take it home, put it in your fridge. It sits in your dark fridge for a while. You eat it. That's a lot of nutrients lost in that process. And there's lots of studies that have been done on this that showed depletions of 50% and up of nutrient values in foods that we eat from just that level of transportation and distribution. Those are the top three. Others are increase in chronic disease, which decreases nutrient absorption, medications that people take that decrease nutrient absorption, just growing need for nutrients because our weight has increased over time, and a lot of the RDAs are based on average body weight. So there are lots of factors, but the unfortunate reality is that just the nature of the modern world that we live in now is antithetical to nutrient, to really maximizing our nutrient intake.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so glad that you brought up just the time, basically respiration rate of vegetables, because I remember reading about that and talking about that in my second book. And there was one study that stood out to me that when a broccoli is picked, it should contain about 25% of your daily needs of vitamin C. And if it's been 7 days since it's been picked, it contains 0% of the vitamin C that your body needs. And I just understanding that plant is eating its own nutrients, just quote unquote, try and stay alive, really put my mindset into looking for local sources. And the hard part is, there are so many competing factors. You're like, well, I want to make sure it's organic because I don't want pesticides, but if I can get it at the farmer's market and they're using regenerative practices and they're not even spraying anything, I want to get it there. I'm sure you saw the story that Whole Foods, once it was purchased by Amazon, it just came out a couple of days ago. It was kind of like a 60 Minutes style where they're showing the quantities and percentages of the organic produce being purchased in China and brought to the United States for Whole Foods. I think...
And that should surprise exactly nobody. If you know what Amazon's priorities are, right? It's sort of like, how did that happen?
Yeah, it's big business, man. It's the bottom line. And they just, those priorities, those values, those like the pillars that they build their business on, they crumble when you turn into a huge conglomerate like that and you are focused on shareholders and the bottom line and profits. And and that was a disappointment. Slight surprise to me, honestly. Like I knew, okay, we're getting things from farther away, or they're probably doing larger purchase orders to bring the dollar amount down. But yeah, that was a bummer, just kind of like a reminder that if you can get things locally, not only you're getting more nutrition, but it's just good to support your neighbors.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I noticed that transition with Whole Foods, and the first thing that happened was there was just less organic local food after Amazon bought Whole Foods. I would see, go in and half of it would be conventional and from a long distance away. And then I would notice, like, even with the organic food, it tasted different. It didn't taste like, that richer flavor that you typically get with organic local food. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. There's so many reasons to shop locally if you can, with the farmer's market or CSA, which, a lot of even small towns have now. You can get a box of produce delivered from a local farm. The nutrient value is going to be not even in the same league with organic produce you can buy from Whole Foods or any other local bigger grocery store that's sourcing it from further away. And that's reflected in the taste. Actually, our palates are a pretty good guide, I think, to the nutrient density of a food. If you taste a tomato that you just picked out of your backyard, part of that flavor that comes from phytonutrients that impart that taste and flavor to that food that you're eating. Those same compounds that have a flavor value have a nutritional value. And so if you taste a tomato and it tastes like water and wax kind of mixed together and cardboard,
Yeah.
which is like what most, store-bought tomatoes taste like, then that's a good sign that it's very depleted in nutrients.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't have the privilege of being able to do this until just this year. We moved into our home in December, and I'm following all the homesteaders now. And I have we're building a grow box, and I just had my friend Chai come over and teach me a few things. She has a fully functioning home garden, and she is in, a busy part of LA, living in the South Bay. And so whether she has perennials, and then she has the seasonal stuff that she's growing as well, and just getting that insight and kind of taking control. I mean, I feel like that's what I've wanted to do in the last couple of years, is like, how can I take a little more control over what my family's eating, what they're doing, the schooling they're getting, whatever it may be. Just, it feels empowering to do that. And so I think even if it's just growing that basil you're talking about, or picking some things to grow at home, that's a great thing to get started with. So
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it for so many reasons, like you said, just it's a great family thing to do. It's great for kids. It's good experience to understand what it's like to grow food and see that whole process. And yeah, the shorter the cycle is between when you harvest something and put it in your mouth, the more nutrient dense it will be. And anybody can do. You could be in New York City in a lot of cases and have like a little planter box on your window, and at least have fresh herbs. And herbs are actually among the most nutrient dense foods, ounce for ounce. So even just growing some fresh herbs in a little box on your windowsill can make a big difference in your daily nutrient intake.
so important too, because I think the majority of people skip over purchasing herbs because of either the quantity you need to buy compared to what they were trying to make in their recipe. Like, if you need a tablespoon of fresh dill and you're being given, a huge bushel of it, they may not know what to do with the rest of it. And so it feels wasteful. So I love that. Let's head back to soil quality and talk a little bit about regenerative farming and soil quality, and how that's increasing nutrient density of the soil.
Yeah. So, starting with the sort of flip side of that, like how conventional farming decreases the nutrient density, and then we can sort of just reverse that
Okay.
into what regenerative farming does. So, um, this is something I've only recently learned about in the past couple of years. My impression before was that poor that the nutritional quality of produce was declining because there were fewer nutrients in the soil. It's
Mhm.
actually not true. I learned this from David Montgomery and Ann Bilke, who are soil scientists, and Ann's a science journalist that writes about soil. Essentially, what's happened is that we have disrupted the microbiome of the soil. And it turns out that microbes in soil, one of the many roles that they play is helping plants to absorb nutrients from
Just
the
like
soil,
us.
just like us. The microbes do that for us in our gut. And turns out they do that in the soil as well. So the amount of nutrients is often similar or the same in soil, but the plants actually can't extract them because we've disrupted the microbiome of the soil. How have we done that? Well, industrial agricultural methods, heavy tillage, for example, monocropping, just essentially devastating,
Yeah.
the topsoil and the soil without doing any kind of rotation, and just growing the same crop over and over with that kind of heavy tillage is very problematic, and disrupts the microbiome of the soil. And of course, all the chemical pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers have that effect as well. So, in a nutshell, it's industrial agriculture that has really affected the microbiome of the soil, just as our industrial lifestyle has affected our own microbiome with antibiotics. The analogy would be with drug antibiotics and other medications similar to the pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers, and then not feeding our microbiome with the things that it needs to be enriched. So if you just turn that around with regenerative agriculture, they're not using those chemical pesticides and herbicides, no glyphosate, not using chemical fertilizers. They're using animal fertilizer instead. They're rotating crops. They're not using. They're doing no tillage methods. So they might grow a particular crop, let it go fallow, then bring cows and chickens in to refertilize the soil. And they're following methods that are time tested, that human beings have been doing for a very long time, and they work. Actually, there's some deep wisdom there that we've reconnected with, and that enriches the microbiome of the soil, and it enriches the nutrient value of the plants that grow in those soil, and of course then the animals that eat those plants, including us.
Right. It works its way all the way up to us. And I think that is so impactful. And what is even more fascinating is the amount of carbon sequestration that can happen when you have deep roots and grasslands. So it's really taking care of all of us, the whole planet, all the plants, all the animals, and all the people. So without being doomsday, because we know what the issues are, right? It's the physical breakdown of our soil microbiome, the chemical breakdown of that, the globalization of our food sourcing, and unfortunately, then the other chemicals that we come in contact with, like endocrine disrupting chemicals that may not even be from our food, from cleaning supplies, from the skincare we're using. It all kind of feels like, wow, there's a lot of whack-a-moles. Like we got to whack a lot of moles here to get our nutrient status back to where it needs to be and our gut health in a safe place. So how did you do that with your wife and yourself when you were trying to conceive? Because that's such a sensitive time in life when being in optimal health is critically important for procreation. And I know the majority of people listening in on this show are around my age. Maybe they're having young kids, thinking about having kids. Their kids are, starting to grow up and go through school. All of this, I mean, it's a very sensitive time. So what did you do? How did you how did you diagnose any type of insufficiencies, and what can we start to do?
Yeah, so we're probably a good example because we were both already very health conscious. I was, in fact, in school studying Chinese medicine and functional medicine at that time. I had gone through my own significant health challenge and adopted a paleo type of diet, nourishing traditions type of diet and that was a big part of my recovery. And my wife already ate very well and took great care of herself. Along with that. So we were not coming from like eating cheese doodles and drinking big gulps and a really nutrient depleted diet. And yet we were both a little bit on the older side, for with our first child. And maybe that played some role in difficulty conceiving. And then my wife was dealing with an autoimmune condition which we didn't know about when we first started trying to conceive, and it became something that we learned. It was part of the process, but essentially, me being the geeky person that I am, I did a really deep dive in the scientific literature on what the most important nutrients were for conception, and then I also studied traditional diets. And as I'm sure you know, Kelly, most traditional cultures around the world, when a couple is getting ready to conceive, they put them on a special fertility and conception diet. And some do that for months and months before the plan, the conception is, ideally going to take place. And the specific diets vary from culture to culture in some regard, but they all are extremely nutrient dense. That's what they share in common. Of course, these traditional cultures weren't approaching it from a scientific perspective, but they had thousands of generations of deep cultural knowledge that that I think through trial and error, where they learn what the most nutrient dense foods are. And these foods are egg yolks, organ meats, dark leafy greens, the odd bits of the animal. So for collagen and glycine. So like that would be like bones, chuck roast, broth, oxtail, shanks, these cuts of meat that are not really had fallen out of favor to some extent in exchange for like boneless, skinless chicken breast and lean steak, but that actually are very nutrient dense and balance out some of the nutrients that we have in our diet. Fermented foods, dairy product, full fat fermented dairy, often raw, very nutrient dense food, particularly with calcium that's important for the development of the skeleton, and K2 when it's from pasture raised animals, another important fertility nutrient. The organ meats are very rich in vitamin A, liver, B vitamins, choline, all nutrients that are crucial for fertility. So without having any scientific apparatus at their disposal, these cultures just knew that those were the most nutrient dense foods, and they would feed both the women and men what might strike us as being absurd amounts of those foods, sometimes 6 to 8 egg yolks a day, liter of raw milk, like just really, really understanding that the body needs as much nutrition as possible to grow a baby. If you really think about what it takes from an resource perspective to conceive and then grow a baby to full term, that's a lot. There's a lot going on there, and if you enter into that journey in an already depleted or even suboptimal state, it's just going to be more difficult. And there's more of a chance of things going wrong. And there's more of a chance that the body you just won't conceive, because conception requires a background of, like, if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, if the body is under a lot of stress, and I don't just mean emotional or psychological stress, I mean the stress that could be caused by nutrient deficiency, chronic illness, whatever, that's not a safe like a safe environment for a baby to come into from the body's conscious kind of evaluation. You might think it's safe in your head, in your mind, but like there's wisdom that's in our bodies that we don't really even, that's not coming just from our frontal cortex. And there's actually been plenty of studies that show that when men or women under great psychological and emotional stress, then fertility drops like a rock. And it makes sense if you think about it, right? Like, it's not an ideal environment for a baby to enter into. And evolution is always optimizing for procreation and passing our genes on, and our genes are less likely to be passed on if a baby's born in a very stressful environment. And so, with that traditional knowledge, and then with all of the research that I did on optimizing nutrient status, I created a kind of super nutrient dense diet protocol for both of us, and then also added in supplements, because even then, this was 13 years ago now, I was aware that of some of these challenges that we talked about in the beginning of the show, that would make it difficult for us to get all of the nutrients that we needed through food. So it was a combination of diet and supplements. And in about 3.5 or 4 months after doing that, my wife, we conceived, and now have a beautiful 11-year-old daughter who's healthy and well. And it was just a powerful experience for me and for my wife to have that visceral, firsthand knowledge of how important those nutrients are, for not only for our general health and well-being, but for conception and fertility.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting. I mean, I, like you and your wife, our family cares a lot about eating protein, fat, fiber, leafy greens. Like, that is the foundation and like the skeleton of the majority of our diet. And I've been so surprised on so many NutriVals to see my numbers low when I think I supplement pretty consistently. I source what I believe is some of the highest quality proteins and veggies that I can get my hands on. And it's still like, it's a wake-up call to get a NutrIval back and see that you're low in specific fat-soluble vitamins, or even the B vitamins that give you so much energy every day, or critical minerals. So that supplementation piece really does make a difference. And I think when women out there are having multiple pregnancies, for me, between Tosh and my second son and this pregnancy, I mean, I had to get iron IVs, and I am someone who eats the Force of Nature ancestral blend at least once a week. So it was quite shocking to me. But when you look at, the stress that we're all under, or the food supply, and breastfeeding for 2 years and a few months with my second, and expecting my body to be ready to rock and roll for number three. I mean, it's almost like when you think about athletes. If you want to be an athlete, you got to eat like one and train like one. It's the same when you're looking to conceive. So I'm curious how about the super nutrient dense diet that you and your wife went on, and how close it was to eight egg yolks a day and a liter of raw milk. Like, what did it look like every day? I think for some of us, it might seem a little bit overwhelming to have to commit to something like that. But like, what were some of the easy things that you were incorporating? What were some of the daily things you were doing, or weekly things you were doing, to ensure that you were both getting these nutrients into your diet?
Yeah, I will definitely answer that, and just want to address the first part of the question, or the comment. It is depressing, frankly, that you can do all those things right and still be nutrient deficient. And to be honest, I was a little bit stubborn at first, and like, when I started my career, I really had a strong belief that we should be able to meet all of our nutrient needs through food alone. And I still have that belief, that as long as you emphasize that word "should," because
Yeah.
in a perfect world, we should.
Yeah.
Our ancestors did, and I would like to live in that world where we could just meet nutrient needs through food alone. I don't like taking supplements.
Yeah.
This is coming from someone who has his own supplement brand and takes supplements, but I don't like to. If I could just get all my nutrient needs through food, I would so much prefer that to taking supplements. I don't know who wouldn't. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, who really enjoys the process of taking supplements? And so I feel like I was in for a couple of years, I was in a bit of a denial, like just kind of holding fast to my desire for how things should be, and not like being a little slow on realizing, okay, we're not living in that world anymore. I can like accept that and come to terms with that and take appropriate action, or I can just stay stuck in that sort of denial that and maybe nostalgia for a type of world that we don't live in anymore, and may not be coming back in our lifetimes.
Right.
And so once I did accept that, it shifted things for me, because then it was more like, okay, what do I need to do? Like, given the situation that we're in now, what we need to do. And one of the easiest analogies that I use with patients is the bank account. So there are some things that we do, and some things in the modern world that deplete the account. If we're thinking about the bank account as our nutrient status. So there are things we do that are withdrawals, and there are things we do that are deposits. And what your example is great. Like, you make a lot of deposits, which is awesome. But there were also just because lots of things that were withdrawals that were good things. Like having a baby is a withdrawal.
Yeah.
It's also a deposit in a different account, not in the
Yeah.
nutrient account, but in your like heart and
Love tank.
soul and love account.
Yeah.
It's a big deposit, but it's frankly, it's a withdrawal on the nutrient balance and energy account in most cases. And then stress is a withdrawal.
Yeah.
Living in the modern world and being exposed to environmental toxins which we don't have very much control over, is a withdrawal. So there are all these withdrawals that are just inherent to living in the modern world at this point. And we can do our best to balance the account by eating a nutrient dense whole foods diet. But what I've learned over the years is that's not enough on its own. And I'm finally like at peace with that on a relative basis, and have now like set out to help people overcome that with as many tools as possible. So for us, that diet was it wasn't 8 egg yolks a day, but it was at least 4 through a significant period. And so sometimes that might look like breakfast with scrambled eggs, just a couple, and then maybe a smoothie later, like a nutrient dense smoothie that had pasture raised raw egg yolks in it. It might sound gross, but you can't even taste it. And if you're getting eggs from a really high quality source, the risk of salmonella, which some people are concerned about, is extremely low. Fortunately, both my wife and I tolerate dairy products pretty easily, especially fermented whole and raw dairy products. So there was quite a bit of that. Not so much fluid milk for me, but my wife was able to do that. But we'd make homemade kefir, yogurt, cream, butter, fermented cream that you can make by adding a little bit of kefir to cream and leaving it out. It turns into almost like a pima sour cream type of texture. It's great to put on top of soups. You can put it on all kinds of different foods. So we would eat that regularly. Organ meats, not surprisingly. So different ways of eating liver, like chopping it up and adding it to ground meat, like the force of nature you mentioned does that for us now. But back in the day, that was manual. 2 or 3 ounces added to each pound of ground beef, and then seasoning it to disguise the taste. Especially for me, my wife is a little more willing to eat, little less averse to the taste of liver than I am. I would force myself to do it. But then there was like pate, liver, chicken liver pate, and other products that would have organ meats kind of mixed in that we would do. We were living in the Bay Area at that time and had access to a local community supported kitchen that would mix organ meats in just about everything. It was called Three Stone Hearth, and it was based on the philosophy of nourishing traditions and the Weston Price Foundation. And so that was a big help to us. But there's a lot of that stuff available now that wasn't available when we were going through this, like Force of Nature, or even like Epic bars that are made with liver and bison. Like you couldn't go to the store and buy those when we were doing this. So don't despair if you think this all sounds like a lot of work. There are definitely some good workarounds. Lots of fermented foods, supportive of the gut microbiome. So we were, sauerkraut, kimchi, beet kvass are probably 3 favorites for us. Dark leafy green vegetables, seafood, particularly shellfish. Oysters are one of the top sources of zinc and copper. And when I say top, I mean way off way higher than even the next source is like not even remotely in the building compared to. So like even just 1 or 2 servings of smoked oysters. If you don't like fresh oysters, you can get smoked oysters in a little tin in olive oil in Whole Foods. And if you don't like the taste of them, they're only about this big, so you can literally like swallow them like vitamins.
That's what I do. I just I'm down for oysters on the half shell and fresh, but when it comes to the canned stuff, it is a swallow situation for me.
Yeah, and the oysters on the half shell, like for most people, it's not something they're doing every day.
No,
they don't have access to that every day.
I don't either.
The smoked oysters are good, and like I said, if you don't like the taste, this might sound a little gross. They'll slide down your throat. You won't really even notice them.
Yep.
And then small fish like sardines, anchovies, mackerel, herring, if you like those, or canned bone-in fish like salmon, canned salmon with the bones still in it, from a company like Vital Choice, which makes really good wild-caught, sustainable canned fish. The bones are really soft, in the canned fish, and those are an amazing source of bioavailable calcium, especially if someone's listening to this and they can't tolerate dairy. That can be a good replacement for calcium, is eating canned bone-in fish. And then, of course, EPA and DHA are super important for fertility and for brain, cognitive and neurological health of the growing baby. Let's see, what am I missing? Of course, in addition to the organ meats, also red meat, red meat is far more nutrient dense than poultry. Most people don't realize this. When we back in the 80s and 90s, when we got on the low fat craze and switched to boneless, skinless chicken breast, that was a big disservice to people. I often encounter people who say, I eat meat, but only chicken. And I often wonder about that, because chicken is the least sustainable meat that you can eat. It's the most resource intensive in some ways. You get the least meat for killing an animal, like a single life. And this is why, like in the old days, chicken used to be Sunday dinner. It was a special occasion. And it was not a regular thing that people consume. Beef, particularly cows, bison, ruminant animals, so much more nutrient dense, so much more nutrition for one life, so much more sustainable from an environmental perspective if it's done properly. So, red meat was really our emphasis. And then, red meat and fish, basically, and seafood were at the top of the list. And I'm going to later in this, when we get to this point, I'll share a study that was done a little less than a year ago on that quantifies the nutrient density of foods, and you'll see that it almost matches exactly what we did and what I'm talking about. And I'm not saying this to toot my own horn. I'm saying that the ancestral wisdom that passed this knowledge on for generations is just astounding. Without any access to modern science, that they were able to identify all of these most nutrient dense foods. And now we've been able to verify that with modern science. It's pretty cool.
Well, let's jump into what these nutrient deficiencies are and what this study showed, because I think, that's proof in the pudding.
Yeah. So, first thing to say is, like, you mentioned this, but I just want to reiterate it. We're not talking about full-blown clinical nutrient deficiencies that would cause diseases like rickets or scurvy or pellagra or beriberi. Fortunately, we've mostly overcome those, at least in the industrialized world, due to fortification of foods, which has a whole bunch of other problems. But those diseases do still exist around the world. But they actually still exist more than you might think, even in the developed world, in the richest country in the world, the United States. There's quite a few people who are still suffering from frank nutritional deficiency, which just is heartbreaking, wherever it occurs. But still an issue here. What we're mostly focused on, though, is what some scientists call nutrient inadequacy, which means a level of shortfall that can cause serious health problems, including infertility or difficulty conceiving, but increase in chronic disease and shorten our lifespans. But it's not going to kill us tomorrow. It's not an acute problem like that. So when you look at it that way, the levels of nutrient deficiency in the U.S. This is similar in other industrialized countries. But I have more access to U.S. data, so I'm going to share that. According to the Linus Pauling Institute, 100 people fall short. 100% of people fall short on potassium. So it's probably 99 point something that they round up. There's got to be one or two people that don't, but it's almost everybody.
Right.
You have 94% vitamin D, 92% choline, 93% magnesium, 89% vitamin E, and it just keeps going from there. So we're not talking about a small percentage of the population. We're talking about almost everybody being, falling short of not just one, but several essential vitamins and minerals. And that doesn't include phytonutrients, which are not essential in the sense that we can't live without them, but a growing body of evidence suggests that we're not going to live very well without them. And there are just fewer studies at this point that quantify intake of phytonutrients and have even set, optimal thresholds for that. But we know that most people are falling short of the level of phytonutrients that we need for optimal health and longevity. So that's the breakdown in terms of what the problem is. In terms of the foods that can really make the biggest difference, we have to look at this from two angles. So my belief, and this is going to contradict what plant-based diet advocates believe, and this is going to also contradict what carnivore diet advocates believe. But my belief is, and this is supported by a lot of different lines of evidence, is that most human beings thrive on a combination of plant and animal foods. And the reason for that is that
I'm like little golf clap over here.
Yeah. So and we can look at the reason I think that is that's what shows up in the archaeological, anthropological record. We're not aware of any culture that voluntarily followed an exclusively animal-based diet or an exclusively plant-based diet. Right. That's fairly significant evidence that we would have to have a strong hypothesis for why, if a 100% plant-based diet was ideal, why didn't that evolve over time? Why don't we see cultures that were doing that? And same thing for pure carnivorous diet. But then we can also look at modern biochemistry and understanding the nutrients that the body needs, and then where those nutrients are found in food. And then we can look at studies, observational and interventional studies. When you put all that together, that's the conclusion I think that you naturally reach. So animal foods are highest in essential vitamins and minerals. So again, essential has a very specific meaning here. It doesn't just mean important. It means that we can't live without them, and we can't produce those nutrients on our own. We have to obtain them from food or supplements. So these are the vitamins and minerals that everybody knows about. The B vitamins, fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, C, E, K2, minerals like iron and zinc and magnesium. These are the nutrients that are essential and we can't live without. These are preferentially or exclusively, in some cases, found in animal products. This is not controversial. Well, it is, I guess, on the internet, but amongst scientists and textbooks, it's not controversial that these nutrients are more highly represented in animal foods than plant foods. That's just a fact. And anyone who argues with that does not understand science.
Right.
The exception is vitamin C.
Yeah.
Which is an essential nutrient that we can't live without. And that is found preferentially in plant foods. But for almost all of the other essential nutrients, they're preferentially found in animal-based foods. DHA and EPA, the long-chain omega-3 fats, without getting too deep into the weeds on the science here, they're not considered to be, historically, they have not been considered to be essential because there are precursors, ALA and LA, that are found in plant foods that can be converted in theory into EPA and DHA, which we really need. But studies have found that, like in the case of ALA being converted to DHA, that can be less than 0.5% of ALA gets converted into DHA in some people. So that means you can eat all the flax seeds and walnuts that you want, but you're not actually going to get enough DHA out of that. And this is why a lot of vegans have DHA deficiencies or even vegetarians. So some scientists have argued that EPA and DHA should actually be reclassified as essential because we arguably can't get enough of what we need just by eating the plant precursors.
It should definitely be looked at now, just looking at the quantity of other omega fats like our omega-6s that are competing for those same, receptors. It's like you need to have balance there. And with the quantity of omega-6 that we're all consuming now with seed oils everywhere and in everything, I completely agree with you.
We could go down a whole rabbit hole on this one, but suffice to say that, and just, lots of scientists who spent their entire lifetime studying fatty acids are advocating for this. So I wouldn't be surprised in the next 5 years to see EPA and DHA being reclassified as essential. And the reason I mention that is that EPA and DHA are almost exclusively found in animal foods. Pasture-raised animal products, actually, pasture-raised beef can be a decent source of long-chain omega-3 fats, and fish and seafood, shellfish, of course. DHA is found in algae, marine algae. That's actually why fish and seafood are a high source of it. So there is a plant-based source of DHA, but most people are not eating algae that I know of. So that would just be a supplement that somebody's taking. So animal foods, high in essential vitamins and minerals, and EPA and DHA. But as I mentioned before, I think we also need the nutrients that are found in plant foods. So that includes vitamin C, which is an essential nutrient. But then you have carotenoids like lycopene, beta-carotene, lutein, and zeaxanthin. A lot of people have heard of these now. Diallyl sulfides, which are from the allium class of vegetables like onions and garlic. Then you have polyphenols. You've got flavonoids like flavanols and quercetin and anthocyanins. You've got diethylethionines or lithianines. That one's a tricky one. You've got lignans, you've got plant sterols and stanols, you've got isothiocyanates like sulforaphane. People have heard of that.
Cruciferous vegetables.
Vegetables, indoles. And then you've got fiber, which is not a nutrient that we absorb, but it's a nutrient, going back to the gut, the importance of the gut microbiome and the microbiome in general. It's a nutrient that nourishes the gut bacteria and leads to all kinds of downstream health effects. So all of those foods that I just mentioned are primarily, if not exclusively, found in plants. And that's why I have always argued that the best diet is some combination of animal and plant foods. And that's just reinforced when you're looking at things from a nutrient density perspective and you're trying to maximize your intake of all of these different nutrients. Now, how much plant and animal food somebody consumes, I think there's a pretty wide latitude there, depending on all kinds of individual factors, cultural norms, food preferences, what stage of life you're in, whether you're trying to conceive, for example, or you've just had a baby, you're in the postpartum period, whether you're an athlete, training, competing, genetics, epigenetics, et cetera. And I think when you look around the world, you can see really big differences. Like you can see cultures like the Maasai, the Inuit, who derived a large percentage of their calories from animal foods and only ate a small amount of plant foods. But they did eat a small amount of plant foods, and they went out of their way often to get those small amounts of plant foods. And then you have the flip side of like the Tukasenta in Papua New Guinea and the Kitavans in the South Pacific, who got a pretty large percentage of calories from plant foods, but did really emphasize certain animal foods seasonally or when they were available, or they traded for them or whatever. They went out of their way to get those because they knew that those were important for their overall health and well-being. So I think that's what makes the most sense for the vast majority of people.
I 100% agree with you, and just understanding also the synergies, what we were talking about earlier, the synergies between the gut microbiome's ability to support the synthesis of vitamins, the bioavailability, the uptake of those vitamins. I had someone on the podcast and we were talking about polyphenols and how, the polyphenols present in our food, those phytonutrients are directly from our food, are not as absorbable. 5% of those are absorbed, but when our microbes get their hands on it, what they produce, those postbiotics that are polyphenol-like and, anti-inflammatory and beneficial to all the cells in our body, are 95% of bioavailable to us. So it truly is this synergistic, symbiotic relationship that without both, how are we living an optimal, vital life?
That's a great example, of all of the ways that these systems interact and are important. And if you have a situation where somebody grew up, took a lot of antibiotics as a kid, maybe took tetracycline for acne. I'm raising my hand too. my mom and dad actually did a pretty good job with diet to the best of their ability, but it wasn't as good as my diet is now by any stretch. Then I got sick in Indonesia with a really bad gut pathogen, had to take more herbs and medications to clear that, all kinds of factors that just were outside of my control growing up as a kid, especially. And then, I didn't choose to get sick and go through that whole experience. And a lot of people have similar stories, right? That all then makes it less likely that I'm going to be able to absorb the full nutrient value of the foods that I eat until I'm able to, to take action to restore the gut microbiome. And the reality is, like, perfection is difficult.
Yeah.
In the environment that we live in now. And that's the bad news. The good news is you don't have to be perfect to live a really rich, healthy, rewarding life, and to have, feel like you're really thriving, have optimal health, and live a long time. And that's kind of my message at this point, is like, let's recognize where we're at in history and the challenges that we face and be honest about those. And then let's set our life up in a way that we give ourselves the best possible chance of overcoming those challenges and feeling and performing our best and living the life that we want to live. That's really what this is about for me, and what I try to help my patients with.
Well, you've always been so mission driven and helping people heal because of your own personal experience, because of helping your wife, supporting your wife and yourself to conceive Sylvie, and just, whether it's your podcast or your website or the knowledge that you've always shared freely. I've always just really respected everything you've done and looked to you as such a trusted mentor, and someone that I think just really has always done it right. Because as the science changes, and I think I probably said this on the last podcast, you are someone who stands out to me as a practitioner that's always jumped on the gun and said, hey guys, I said this before. This is a new study that came out. This is how my family's changing. This is how it's changing in my practice. These are the things that we're seeing and how we're leveling up. And so first, I just want to thank you for always being that way, because I think with every project you take on and everything that you put out, you've always had the best intentions and would be the first to pivot when and if a change is seen in the scientific literature. And it's something I've always really respected. So, thank you for that. And thank you for putting this knowledge out there for us so we can all get pregnant and feel our best.
Well, I appreciate that, Kelly. And I am sometimes annoyingly relentless when it comes to staying current with the research. And a recent example of that is we just launched Adapt Naturals, my supplement line, which really has the goal of helping people to overcome the challenge of nutrient deficiency and supercharge their nutrient status. We launched in July, and I'm already reformulating 3 of the products because of new research that's come to light, and just not big changes, but with the like adjusting some of the ratios of the fat soluble vitamins and decreasing the dose of selenium a little bit because of some recent data on potential for toxicity at higher doses and just the amount that people are getting. New studies came out, and it's just like, I can't not do that, because I'm so, I spend so much time reading the research and the literature. And the good news is I can, it's a great thing about this was one of the main reasons I wanted to launch my own supplement line, is like, and this isn't a criticism of every other supplement. I'm not that grandiose or egotistic. There are a lot of good products out there. But if there was one product that was 90% of the way there, but not exactly quite the way I wanted to do it, it's hard for me to live with that. So I wanted to be able to create products that were pretty much exactly the way I wanted them. And of course, that's going to change over time as new research comes out and new ingredients become available, et cetera. So it's really fun part of the process for me to be able to have that level of control. I guess I'm just a control freak. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, I will say looking at the last 11 years of working with functional MDs like yourself and practitioners that have worked with my clients, hand in hand with them, getting their diagnostic tests, helping them, supporting them to create their food plan for themselves or their family, and increasing their nutrient density. One of the things that I used to see a lot of the times would be that Costco size cardboard box of supplements that the patient or my client, your patient, would come home with the printout of like how many pills they were taking all day. And I really do think it was because, you get all these diagnostic tests back, NutriVals, you get the GIFX, you get, the hormones, whether it's a Dutch test or whatever you're using. And then there's specific ailments or symptoms that they're having. And so you're trying to cherry pick and put together to kind of like optimize their nutrient status. And sometimes it can feel like a lot for them. So I feel like a practitioner founded supplement line with the practitioners that's doing the work and in the science can actually streamline and make it way more efficient, because you can probably lower the quantity of pills someone's taking, optimize their nutrient density, and really target specific things in a new way. So, and now I am curious. Hopefully it's not 50 pills a day, Chris, but
no.
how like what are some of the the supplements that you've created and think that everyone should be taking? I mean, looking at your deficiency numbers, 94% of people being deficient in vitamin D, choline. I mean, I think about choline for pregnancy. I think there was a study showing that was like 900 milligrams was like optimal for women, and majority of prenatals don't have it. And if you're a vegetarian or vegan woman, you're not getting it in your food. And that is literally your child's future IQ and cognitive abilities.
That's
so
a big one.
It's critical. But yeah, so can you tell me a little bit about the line? And
sure.
I mean, I think the hard part is figuring out what you should take, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's an astute observation. Like if you actually go to Adapt Naturals homepage, the headline is "Better Supplementation, Fewer Supplements."
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't like taking supplements. So I'm always wanting to like minimize as much as possible. And if you look at, I created a bundle of 5 supplements, a daily stack that I think meets the needs of most people. And if you look at the reviews on that, it's the Core Plus bundle. A lot of people say exactly what you said. They're like, I was able to ditch a lot of products that I was taking before because these 5 products pretty much have everything that I was doing, and I'm not only feeling better, I'm also saving money, and that's a huge win for me, and one of the main reasons that I created the line. So the Core Plus bundle has 5 supplements in it. One is a multi, but it's not like a typical multi. It's a combination of the essential nutrients we need, vitamins and minerals, and phytonutrients.
Great.
So it's you kind of think of it as like a multi plus a green and red powder all in one supplement, which makes sense given what I said before, right? We need both of those types of nutrients. So why should a multi just have, essential vitamins and minerals, or why should you take a greens powder that just has the phytonutrients? We really need both. Second supplement will also not be surprising. It's an organ supplement. So it's got liver, kidney, heart, pancreas, and spleen. And those are the 5 nutrients that have been, or 5 organs that have been shown to be among the most nutrient dense foods. 4 of those organs are in the top 10 most nutrient dense foods from that study that I mentioned before.
Wow.
Sadly, most people will not eat organ meats, no matter how much we tell them that they're beneficial and they should.
Chili powder and taco seasoning goes on whatever. It's just not going to work out.
Not happening. And, the organ supplement is certainly the next best thing, because it's basically just the pure organs freeze dried and desiccated into a powder and put in capsules. So it's a totally food-based supplement. It's not synthetic in any way. You're essentially eating organs. You're just eating them in a freeze-dried powdered form. They come from New Zealand, grass-fed, pasture-raised animals, really clean source. So that's great. And it's got organs that, each organ has a different nutritional profile. For example, you mentioned iron earlier. Spleen is even higher in iron than liver. And so and pancreas has its own nutritional profile. So I like the blend because it gives you exposure to all the different types of organs. And if you think it's hard to get people to eat liver, try getting them to eat pancreas or spleen for that matter. So, I mean, I take all of these supplements, but like the organs, even though I still will sometimes eat organs, I just like the insurance policy of, being able to take them every day. You can also, if you don't like swallowing capsules, you can add these to food. The taste is a little milder than it is if you're cooking fresh. So some people like to do that because they don't like swallowing as many capsules. That is one downside of the organ product is serving is 6 capsules because we're putting 5 different organs, dried into those capsules. It's like you're eating a food in capsules. So if it was synthetic, we could make fewer capsules, but I don't want to do that. Yeah. The next is a mushroom blend. So I'm sure a lot of listeners have heard of the healing benefits of mushrooms, especially over the past few years. A lot more media attention. In Chinese medicine, which I studied originally, mushrooms have been used therapeutically for 3,000 to 5,000 years at least. And so I developed a strong appreciation for the healing power of mushrooms very early in my career. And now we have a lot of modern clinical research to back that up. They're used in pretty much every other traditional system of medicine. And again, like the organ blend, I chose to use a blend of 8 of the best researched mushrooms, like reishi, chaga, turkey tail, lion's mane, cordyceps, shiitake, and maitake. These are the ones that have been shown to have the greatest health benefits. And some of them are relatively easy and delicious to eat, like shiitake. Others are tough and bitter and chewy, and so you basically have to make like a concoction, a tea or something. And so we put those all in one supplement, and then rounding it out is a additional magnesium chelated form that's very bioavailable, and then a unique form of vitamin E called tocotrienols that very potent antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and really helpful for conception and fertility as well. So all 5 of those go into the Core Plus bundle, and that's kind of your like set and forget, and let go of. You're good to go. Like, don't have to do 2 hours of internet research every night to figure it out anymore.
Okay, so I have a follow-up question because we talked about the importance of EPA and DHA and vitamin D. Are those all in your multi?
Vitamin D is in the multi, 2,000 IU. Choline is in the organ product, going back to that. The EPA and DHA is somewhat individual. So, I chose not to start to include that initially because some people are getting plenty. You're eating, 3 servings of seafood each week or a serving of shellfish and 2 servings of seafood. You don't need additional DHA and EPA. Some people aren't getting enough. So there's a lot more individual variation there. And don't be surprised if the next product that comes out is a unique EPA DHA form. So I'll just leave it at that for now. And then vitamin D is also quite personal. Like some people need more to maintain the blood levels that are required, and some people need less. So I didn't want to overdo it in the multi for that reason. But I can say that the very next product that's coming out in about a month or 5 weeks is a D3K2 liquid. Great. Highly bioavailable, just in an MCT oil base. And that will allow people to personalize their vitamin D dose. So let's say you need 5,000 instead of 2 that's in the multi, then you would just take 3 drops of this D3K2 liquid blend and add that to what you're doing on a daily basis. And then the reformulation of the multi is going to have even more choline in the bundle. Without going into all the science, there's a lot of considerations about which form of choline is best to use in a supplement, and it took me a while to really get that right with the formula and the blend. So the next iteration of the multi, which will be sometime this year, will have even more choline.
Super important. Well, I'm super excited about it. I'm going to go take the quiz. I'm rocking the prenatal as currently, but definitely know that your stack would probably have me covered in postpartum and beyond. So I really appreciate it. And thank you for sharing your expertise, because it is, it's a wild world now. And I think just coming to grips with what we all have to kind of deal with every day is really important, to have realistic expectations for what we need to do to be at an optimal place when it comes to our nutrient status and to feel our best. And thank you for bringing up, the other things that may be causing issues with our ability to absorb nutrients, whether that's chronic lifestyle diseases, autoimmune diseases, current medications, endocrine disrupting chemicals. We all have the power to swap out our detergents, and it's empowering to get those under control so that we can reproduce and feel our best and really live the life that we want here in 2023. So thank you, Dr. Chris Kresser, for being on the show a second time. I know your time is so valuable and we're stealing it from your patients. So thank you for being here and for sharing all about Adapt Naturals.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelly, for all the amazing work that you do and raising awareness about the importance of everything we talked about. It's so critical, especially at the stage that a lot of your audience is, like either, thinking about conceiving, trying to conceive, pregnant, just had a baby. Like there's no time in life where that's maximizing nutrient status is more important, both for the couple that are bringing the baby into the world and for, of course, the baby and the children that are growing and really need those nutrients more than any other time in their life. So I'm really grateful for you having me on and allowing me to share this, because it is kind of my mission to get this word out there and help people make these relatively straightforward changes that can make a huge difference in their health and well-being.
Well, you dropped some knowledge, and I know that the audience they're walking away with some changes they can make today. So that's all good stuff. Where can people follow along, learn more, and keep up with you?
Yeah, so my website's kriskresser.com. We have been around for a bit, so we've got, I think, 1,200 articles on there and 15 plus free ebooks. I have a podcast of my own. There's tons and tons of free information there. One of the best compliments I've ever received, I think, is that people like to use that site as their health Google. If they have a question, they just go and type it in the search box, and there's usually at least a couple articles or maybe an ebook or podcast episode that can hopefully shed some light on whatever that question is.
Oh man, I couldn't echo that enough. I feel like if people stopped using Google and just went to kriskresser.com, they get way better science-backed answers.
Thank you.
So totally. And it was funny too, because I told my husband, Chris, I was like, oh, I'm interviewing Chris Kresser again today. And he was like, hey, I know that one. We went to his book signing on 3rd Street. And I was like, yep, this is when we were dating, and I would drag you to these things and you would come.
That's funny. And he stuck around.
Yeah, he used to go by, if I was Be Well by Kelly, his nickname was Be Bad by Chris. And there hasn't been a lot of posting on the Be Bad by Chris Instagram in a while. And I just think he's low on content. So breaking him down day by day.
That's good. Yeah. And getting older maybe helps a little bit too. We become, it's a little harder to be bad and not pay the price for that.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like anytime I get him that yearly blood draw with a functional MD and he gets his results back, he's a straight A student, so he always tries to get good marks the next time around. So it's
a competitive aspect.
Really messing with his be bad status.
Yeah. Well, great.
Well, you are a household name, Chris Kresser. We love everything that you do. So thank you for, beating the drum and doing the hard work and reformulating and staying up on the science, because you make us all better.
Thanks again, Kelly. Appreciate it.